I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
So help me God.
His election is historic.
It will be smart bipartisan actions that help us finish the fight.
There is nothing that we cannot achieve.
This is a referendum for us to start working together.
Rebuilding trust will be central to our focus in the White House.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jacqueline Alemany. I'm author of the Washington Post's early morning newsletter, Power Up. Welcome to Washington Post Live this morning and another of our series, the 117th Congress. Our guest today is Texas Congressman McCaul, the ranking Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Welcome to the Post Live, Congressman. Thanks for making the time for us.
Oh, thanks, Jackie. Thanks for having me.
I want to get your reaction to yesterday's big news right off the bat. A jury convicted former police officer Derek Chauvin of murder and manslaughter in the death of George Floyd, nearly a year after the viral video of Chauvin pinning down Floyd with his knee went viral. Your reaction to this verdict?
Well, I think it provided justice not only to the family, but to the nation as part of the healing process of this. It was murder. I was a federal prosecutor for many years. What I saw in the video is clearly murder. It shows our criminal justice system does work, and this is a proper way to handle this kind of situation. And my heart still goes out to the family, but this is a first step, I think, in the healing process, not just for the family, I think, but for the entire country moving forward.
And you were among the Republicans in the House who voted against the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Are you confident that your colleagues in the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, can reach some sort of bipartisan agreement on police reform? What were your issues with the bill initially?
Well, we did have a bipartisan bill called the Justice Act. Senator Scott from South Carolina proposed this in a bipartisan way. I was very disappointed, quite frankly, that the speaker decided to go with a more partisan bill and not something that would pass overwhelmingly on both sides of the aisle. I hope we can bring that back up again, but we obviously need better training with our police departments. I've worked with law enforcement almost my entire professional career. Most of them are very good men and women, putting themselves in harm's way every day. But I think we need that reform. We need the cameras to document what happens. We need to eliminate things like chokeholds, and a lot of it's just better policing and better training. Not defunding the police is a knee-jerk response. For instance, my Austin Police Department got defunded $150 million, and they had nothing to do with the George Floyd murder. I think better training is the answer. Not defunding our police wholesale.
And it seems like the qualified immunity provisions have been what Republicans have been stuck on. Do you think that's a non-starter for something to get pushed through in the Senate and onto President Biden's desk?
Well, every police chief I talk to say that will destroy their ability to recruit new officers. I think the answer to misconduct and criminal behavior is a prosecution, as what happened in the Chauvin case. And I think justice was delivered. I know the family is pursuing a lawsuit against the city, and I think that's appropriate as well. But if we open up liability for everyday police officers that don't make a whole lot of money, they do need to be held accountable, and they are in the criminal justice system. But I think you'd have a very hard time recruiting new talent, new police officers if we opened up that liability provision. And I can tell you the morale is already bad enough. With I think the nation, the sort of public reaction to police officers. Again, what happened in the Floyd case, justice was served. It was murder. And I was very pleased with the outcome in the jury's verdict. But they're not all bad apples.
And I want to talk about an issue that is at the center of the district that you represent. You've been to the border twice in recent weeks. What should the Biden administration be doing about the surge of migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border?
I think go back to the policies that were working. The Remain in Mexico policy was working. the political or the asylum cooperation agreements we made with Central America was working. I had dinner with the ambassadors from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. They don't want to lose a generation of children from their country. And yet, when these policies were reversed on day one by President Biden, which required them to remain in Mexico pending the application process, the traffickers are very smart. There's a direct cause and effect. And you don't have to listen to me. Just talk to the Border Patrol down there that I've dealt with for many years, both as a federal prosecutor and as chairman of Homeland Security Committee. This had a direct cause and effect. The traffickers saw a green light that America was open for business. And unfortunately, it's the children that are suffering. The children, thousands of them making the dangerous journey that takes about 40 days from Central America up through Mexico. And I saw them in the Rio Grande Valley sector recently. It's one of the saddest things I've seen. I know this border. I've seen this movie before, but this is the worst I've ever seen it. And the saddest thing, Jackie, is that it was self-inflicted. I met with the special envoy to Central America yesterday to talk about some constructive ideas working together with the administration. I urge them to reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy and the asylum agreements that were very skillfully and masterfully negotiated. But if you want to talk about the real driver of migration, you have to get to the root cause. And it's not political asylum, it's economic. The economy of scale, the poverty, and the violence that's down in Central America. We are developing a bill, I am with Chairman Meeks, to try to deal with this root cause problem phenomenon. If we can work with the Development Finance Corporation that we authorize into law in the State Department that works with the private sector to invest in developing nations to counter the influence of China as well, this seems to me Central America is a prime destination for this program to operate. In addition to USAID, Exim Bank, and U.S. Trade representatives, this will take the political risk out of the private investment. And so we are working on legislation that would provide this foreign assistance, but really ramp up the State Department's efforts in conjunction with the private sector to invest more in the economies in Central America that will uplift their economies. And at the same time, it's a great foreign policy against China, and it will solve this migration phenomena at the root cause of the problem. I think this is a good policy. Jackie, there are a lot of messaging bills out there. I see this one as a bipartisan bill that I know my ninth term, to get anything done up here, you have to be bipartisan. And Chairman Meeks and I are going to work to get this one done. And I think it's going to have long-term major positive consequences.
That's super interesting. I'm curious to hear more about using the Development Finance Corporation to counter China's actions. Why isn't that something that was done under the Trump administration?
No, I think they were down there. It's one thing to be on the goal line defending your goal, and oftentimes with border security, that's what we do. We just look at it as don't score a touchdown, get into our. We need to look at the 99 yards in front of us, and push it out, push the border out to the root causes. So we can do that through security initiatives, which Elliot Engel and I, who chaired Foreign Affairs, we passed the Northern Triangle Security Initiative, which provides assistance for security and rule of law and has reporting. But this idea that I'm talking about is a fairly new. Now, the DFC we authorized into law in the prior Congress, but in light of this humanitarian crisis, I believe that this is exactly what the DFC was designed to. It was intended for this purpose, really, to help developing nations uplift their economies of scale and counter the Chinese Communist Party all at the same time. And it would solve the migration problem as well.
And on this topic of countering China, you have strongly criticized President Biden's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan on September 11th, the 20th anniversary of the attack on the United States. You've said that it gives the Taliban a complete victory. In what ways have they won?
Well, they didn't. The Taliban did not comply with any of the commitments that were given to them. The only one they abided by was not attacking our forces in Afghanistan. They did not cut their ties to Al Qaeda. They did not comply with the agreements. I had very little hope in the peace process, although I was hopeful we could achieve that. I was critical for many reasons. We just had yesterday, Chairman Meeks and I moderated the discussion with the Director of National Intelligence, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and General Milley. I don't know why September the 11th date was chosen. They were asked that question and they didn't come up with a very good answer. I think in some respects that's very offensive to the victims of 9/11. But my major concern here is, look, the decision's been made. Why am I concerned about this? Because I believe a complete withdrawal, like what we did in Iraq when you had the rise of ISIS and the caliphate. I urged President Trump to have a residual force in Syria, and he did. I believe that a counterterrorism force, residual and small, needs to remain to protect the homeland. The decision now has been made to completely withdraw. What are the consequences of that? That means we're going dark in Afghanistan, with the exception of the embassy, which I think will be at great risk as well of being targeted by the Taliban. We have no intelligence gathering capability now, and once we pull out in Afghanistan, the CIA director recently testified that this would be a tremendous risk, significant risk, and would diminish our intelligence capability in country. And I think all the briefers agreed with that assessment. So where are we now? The Taliban, most likely, when we withdraw, along with Al Qaeda, will overrun the country. They will be a threat to our embassy. We could see our embassy pulling out. We are going to close down Bagram Air Base and all the outward bases as well. If the Taliban and Al Qaeda take over Afghanistan, we could return to pre 9/11 conditions from which they could conduct external operations against the West, both our NATO allies in Europe and the United States of America. Now moving forward in a constructive way, we have to find a way to conduct a counterterrorism mission to both identify threats in country and eliminate them when we find them. The only way we can do that now, if we're out of Afghanistan, is to have these agreements with neighboring countries around Afghanistan that will give us the ISR capability, the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance that we need. We won't have human intelligence on the ground under Title 50. We will have Title 10 capabilities to launch strikes if necessary. But according to all the briefers, this will be far more difficult now with us pulling out 100% out of Afghanistan.
And our colleagues reported last week that Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was against this decision, along with a slate of other military leaders and officials at the Pentagon. Why do you think Biden overrode their guidance on this?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, General Milley, who's a dear friend of mine, a fellow Texan, said the president was very thoughtful. He did listen to his advisors. I think politics had a lot to play in this. And you see it on both sides of the aisle. I think the American people, they're impatient. There's a forever war drumbeat, but 2,500 troops is a very small force, and NATO provided 6,500. To me, that's a very small force to provide an insurance chip for stability in the region. With us pulling out 100%, we'll destabilize Afghanistan and the regions. I think overall, I think as the president said, he didn't want to pass this one down. I think it was based in large measure on politics. I do agree with your assessment that the Secretary of Defense and others and those in the intelligence community, and I can't go into personal conversations. I don't want to divulge my sources, but many of the higher levels in both DOD, state, and the IC were not in favor of this decision.
Do you think there should be any special considerations for Afghan refugees in our asylum and immigration policy going forward?
I had dinner with the first female ambassador from Afghanistan 2 nights ago, and Roya Romani, a dear friend, very smart. Uh, I tell you, Jackie, the thing that really, and President Bush mentioned this as well, what is going to happen to the women? We know the Taliban treat them as chattel, as property. They treat them quite simply like dirt. I'm very, very concerned about the girls and the women in Afghanistan and what is going to happen to them when the Taliban overruns the country with their barbaric tactics. That's part of their religion. We will have a refugee crisis. General Milley told me probably 50,000 refugees will be coming out of Afghanistan. And I think it's our responsibility, since we abandoned our partners, and I think it's our responsibility and NATO to absorb these refugees both into our country and to our NATO alliance partners. That's the least we can do now to protect what is going to be a killing field of women in Afghanistan.
We have also reported that the part of the calculus with the Biden administration was that pulling out of Afghanistan allowed the U.S. to free up some resources to counter China. You've obviously been very critical of China on a variety of issues, human rights abuses, their treatment of the Uyghurs. How do you assess the Biden administration's overall posture towards China right now?
Well, first of all, 2,500 troops, it's really not a large number. We've been in South Korea for a long time, Germany. This is, again, a small force as an insurance chip. So I don't really buy the argument it's going to free up all these resources for China. Now, having said that, I do believe China is the greatest long-term threat to our national security. And I've had a lot of discussions with the administration. How can we counter the Chinese Communist Party, both economically and militarily? They are investing $8 trillion in their digital economy. That's artificial intelligence, quantum computing, Huawei, which is their telecom surveillance, basically their program. And they're also getting very militarily, provocative. In Hong Kong, as you know, they invaded and took over Hong Kong without a shot fired under this national security law, and major human rights abuses. They are currently threatening Taiwan and the Taiwan Straits. They're very provocative in the South China Sea. They have more Navy ships now than we do. They are the second largest economy in the world, and we have to be more, competitive with them. I'm going to be marking up out of the Foreign Affairs Committee, condemning the Chinese Communist Party for genocide, for killing and torturing the Uyghur Muslim population. And I think, we've had the Secretary of State say this, but I think the President of the United States needs to say it as well, that what the Chinese are doing is genocide. And the pictures and video I see of what is happening in China is absolutely horrific. And it's time for the United States Congress to condemn them for these actions.
Do you support a U.S. Boycott of the Olympics?
I think we should have a diplomacy boycott, a diplomat boycott, to not recognize this. But I don't think we should punish the athletes that have trained for so many years. I mean, had we boycotted the Olympic Games in Munich, we couldn't have demonstrated to the world that an African American, Jesse Owens, could take the gold medal and defy Hitler's reasoning that the Aryan race was somehow superior. And then if you look at when Carter boycotted the Games of Moscow, the result there was that the Russians and Chinese took home all the gold medals. So I don't want to, but I do have a bill that will make sure that our athletes are properly briefed, like members of Congress are, before they go into theater, into China, where they will be under heavy surveillance, they will be tracked, and they need to know that. And so I think those briefings are very important. I think the corporate sponsors have a responsibility as well. That as the broadcasts go out, they not play China propaganda on the airways, and they have a responsibility. I think on this as well. I do think the diplomats from our allied nations should boycott the Olympics, but not harm the athletes.
And there's really so much going on a foreign policy front. It feels like every single policy issue was covered last week. The Biden administration also announced new sanctions on Russia. But do you think that they should be doing more to support the imprisoned Kremlin opposition leader, Alexei Navalny?
I do. Any political dissident, whether it's Khashoggi or in the Russian case, we need to stand up for human rights, and we need to stand up for democracy. We're still the beacon of hope around the world, and that's one thing that does bring Republicans and Democrats together. I was very pleased to see President Biden sanction Russia, partly because of their cyber attack in my hometown of Austin with SolarWinds, a very sophisticated malware that went undetected and caused. We still are assessing the damage that's done both to the private sector and the federal government. This is a missing piece in cyber. I authorized a cybersecurity agency at the Department of Homeland Security to protect the nation from cyber threats and sharing of threat information. We have a robust offensive capability with NSA and DoD. The missing piece, Jackie, is the international piece. What are the international norms and standards when it comes to cybersecurity? We don't have any. We let the Chinese steal 23 million security clearances, including mine, without any consequence, at all. So my bill, the Cyber Diplomacy Act, will authorize into law not only the office within state, but an ambassador that will have the legal authorities to reach agreements with foreign nations, particularly our allies, on what is acceptable conduct and what is not. What is an act of cyber warfare? What is cyber espionage? And what should be the consequences to that type of behavior? So far in the cyberspace, we seem to treat it differently, where there are no consequences to bad behavior. If there are no consequences, just like with my 5 children, to bad behavior, guess what? Bad behavior continues. And so this bill will ensure not only that we have more rules of the road, if you will, where we don't, but it will also deal with this cyber sovereignty concept that Russia and China seem to have, where they control their own people through oppressive surveillance through their cyber programs and their telecom programs like WeChat. The doctors trying to report a SARS-like virus, according to international health regulations, were not commended by the Chinese Communist Party, but rather arrested and detained and silenced. Had their voice been allowed to speak out truthfully, the world would have known that we had an epidemic that was growing to become a pandemic, but the Chinese Communist Party put that to a grinding halt.
And I've got to ask you, squeeze in one more question here, but as someone who watched 4 years of President Trump's relations with China very closely, and just this week we saw the former president say that, I like Putin and I think Putin likes me, about his relationship with the Kremlin. How would you explain this affinity that former President Trump has for Vladimir Putin?
I always said Putin's not our friend. We don't cozy up to enemies. He's a former KGB officer. Once KGB, always. I know President Bush said he looked in his eyes and saw his soul. I think every world leader wants to have a relationship with the top foreign adversaries, or as best as they can. But I will tell you that the administration itself, while the rhetoric was out there, we passed more sanctions on Russia than any other time in history. The Congress did, and the administration, was supportive. President Trump was the first president in my lifetime to stand up to China and their aggression and their theft of intellectual property. NSA Director Keith Alexander said it's the greatest transfer of wealth in human history is what it has been stolen by the Chinese. China has stolen our aerospace technology. Their new frontier is to take over space, which is why we formed the Space Force to compete with them in space. We got to compete with them in Belt and Road Initiative in Africa and Latin America. We've got to compete with them in the technology space. I'd take you back to a case I prosecuted when I was a DOJ prosecutor here in Washington, the Johnny Chung case back in the late 90s with the big Chinagate scandal. I prosecuted Johnny Chung. He led us to the director of military intelligence, putting money through China Aerospace into his Hong Kong bank account and then into the Clinton campaign. This has been going on for decades. They're far better at this game of espionage, and they're far better at stealing everything when it comes to our military, our fighter planes, to our technology, to all of our intellectual property. And that has to stop. And I think the COVID was a wake-up call for the American people that we cannot, it's not status quo anymore. We tried to bring them in the family of nations, and it just didn't work. And now they're trying to take over the United Nations. And then finally, Jackie, if I can say, supply chain is so vitally important. Most Americans didn't know most of their medical supplies, like the PPE, comes out of China. We have to look at ways to incentivize companies in the United States to manufacture medical, rare earth minerals. A bill I introduced, the Chips for America Act, will incentivize companies like Samsung and Intel and Global Foundries and Micron to ramp up their game, pull supply chain out of the region that's influenced by China into the United States or our allies to produce these highly advanced chips that are in everything from your iPhone to the F-35 plane. So it would boost manufacturing jobs in the United States and at the same time protect our national security. Jackie, I was in the Oval Office with the president, 4 senators, 4 House members, bipartisan. We were all in agreement. The president said it's the best meeting he's had since he's been in office, and that he's all in. These are the moments in Congress when it does pay off, when you have a good idea like this, and you can actually see it being passed and signed into law.
Unfortunately, Congressman, that's all the time we have today, but thanks so much for this really fascinating conversation.
Oh, thank you, Jackie, and thanks so much for having me.
Please tune in, everyone else, at 1:30 Eastern Time today when my colleague Paige Winfield Cunningham is going to host a program with education and health leaders about the future of schools post-pandemic. You can always head to WashingtonPostLive.com to register and find more information about our upcoming programs. Thanks for joining us today.